I went to a company dinner and, when the waiter guided me to my table, my gaze was involuntarily drawn to the low laugh coming from the table next to me. A laugh that I knew all too well. The sound infiltrated my ear like a sharp blade before my eyes even confirmed what my heart was already beginning to fear. She was there. Sitting across from a man who was not me. She was wearing the dark blue dress that I had chosen for our wedding anniversary 2 years earlier. The same smile that she said she kept just for me was now generously offered to another. Her hands moved delicately, touching his arm, as if it were natural, as if everything I was and had built with her could be discarded with the same lightness of that touch. I was paralyzed for a moment, as if the world around me had lost its sound, its color, its movement. But my body, on impulse, stood up. I walked over to their table, and when she saw me, her smile fell like a mask cracked with shame. I didn't yell. I just said, firm and cold as the ice that forms between two lives that have just collided, "You've been seeing another man while I thought you were home. Now you're going to have to explain that to our children and to the judge, because I'm getting a divorce right now." She tried to mumble something, but her voice was lost among the sound of glasses clinking in the background and the discreet glances of her colleagues who witnessed my public emotional breakdown. That night was not only the end of my marriage. It was the trigger for something I would never have imagined, a silent conspiracy that had been taking shape for months. I just didn't see it. I didn't want to see it. Because I was too much of a romantic fool, too busy, too optimistic. And she was cold enough to trick me with a kiss on the forehead before going out on dates like that, saying she would stay home and rest. The coldness with which she would come home, lie down on my bed and cuddle in my arms after being with him, that was what ate me up the most inside. The fact that she looked me in the eyes with the same expression she did to him. Or worse, maybe with less intensity. But the betrayal, I soon realized, was not just physical. It was a plan. A game of manipulation and chained decisions to rip me out of my children's lives. I discovered, days later, that the two of them were planning to leave together. Yes, leave. To another country. With my children. With their bags packed for a new life that had been designed in secret, with false documents, passports ready, and even international school already enrolled. It was not just a romantic getaway. It was an escape. A layered emotional kidnapping, subtly planned under my roof. While I worked, traveled, and killed myself to support a house, she printed papers on my computer and had meetings with him in cafes on the other side of the city. They both used my absence as a bridge to their new world. A world where I would be just a ghost. The details began to emerge with surgical precision. The calls that had been deleted from her cell phone. The emails with code names. The bank passwords that had been changed. I, who had always been blind to trust, had to learn to see again. Each new discovery was a stab in the back, but also a lesson. I discovered that she had told her lover everything about me, my weaknesses, my schedule, my routine with the boys, my dreams. She used every part of me to fuel their intimacy. She transformed my love into fuel for their romance. And the most perverse part, she told her children that I was increasingly absent. That I didn't prioritize them. That she was the only one present, the only one who cared. She built the image of an indifferent father so that, little by little, she could erase me from their hearts. Until the day of the dinner. Until that moment when fate presented me with the chance to watch my own emotional funeral from the best seats in the house. I wasn't just betrayed. I was replaced. Cancelled. As if my existence were disposable, an obstacle in the way of a teenage crush disguised as redemption. But they were wrong about one thing, I was still there. And when a man is betrayed to the core, he doesn't just suffer, he transforms. I rose from the ashes of shame and began to rebuild my own name. While she entangled herself in lies to justify the unjustifiable, I prepared my response. Not with violence, not with shouting. But with strategy, with dignity, with precision. And, above all, with the truth. The truth she feared. The truth he didn't know. Because neither of us imagined that I would discover their plans. Neither of us knew that I had a friend in immigration. Nor that I would start recording conversations. Nor that I would track the devices used in our home. Nor that justice, when it finds clear evidence, can be cruelly efficient. Neither of us imagined that it would be me, that husband betrayed and ridiculed at a public dinner, who would make the final decision about the fate of all of us. And when the bombshell dropped, when she realized that her children would not be taken away from me, that her lover would lose his work visa, that all her documents were being analyzed by a federal investigation, that was when she understood that the love she had killed had become something much more powerful, a force for justice. She tried to change things. She tried to cry, write letters, schedule therapy sessions. But the woman who came back to my door was no longer the same. She was a stranger. I didn't recognize her. Because now I could see everything. There was no longer a veil of love. Only remnants of a past buried with the remains of my trust. She, who said she just wanted a little freedom, ended up trapped in a maze of lies. And he, who said he loved her so much, was the first to disappear when things got tough. I watched it all from afar. Like someone who finally sees the end of a tragic film where they were the involuntary protagonist. And despite the pain, there was a strange peace. Because sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find what really matters. And on that path, I found someone. Someone who saw me even in pieces. But that's another part of the story. Now, what perhaps no one knows, and what perhaps changes everything, is that one of the children, already knew. You already knew everything before me. And he had made a silent choice. A choice that, when made, could completely destroy whatever was left of the relationship between mother and children. Because the secret he keeps, is more painful than any marital betrayal. And that's why this story isn't over yet. She's just getting started. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support any kind of betrayal, never. All the stories you will hear are fiction, but based on situations extremely real, to show how betrayal is capable of destroy families, hearts and futures. Let it serve as a warning, not an inspiration. Get ready now to dive into a shocking story, intense and unforgettable. Take a deep breath, the truth will hurt. From the first moment Daniel's eyes met Helena's, there was a kind of silence between them that said more than any conversation. It was as if, at that moment, everything had been aligned by an invisible force that had decided that two strangers needed to be more. They had met at a company event where he worked as a project manager and she had been invited to speak about female leadership. Helena was not only charismatic, she was firm, eloquent and absurdly intelligent. Her dark eyes seemed to hold an ancient strength, and her way of speaking, with her hands and her entire body, captured the attention of anyone nearby. Daniel, on the other hand, had always been more restrained, methodical, careful with his words and with people. The union of the two seemed unlikely at first glance, but over time it revealed itself to be a powerful combination. While she expanded, he anchored. While she took risks, he calculated. It was precisely in this balance that their relationship was built, slowly, like someone building a house with their own hands, brick by brick, day after day, until they became indispensable to each other. The wedding came after 2 years of intense dating and a relationship that seemed to have been taken from a modern romance novel. They laughed a lot together, traveled whenever they could and, most of all, admired each other. Helena used to say that Daniel was the only man who made her feel safe and free at the same time. And Daniel, when he spoke of her, referred to her as the woman who had brought color to a life that until then had been made up of rules and deadlines. They bought a corner house in a quiet neighborhood, with large windows and light walls, where the sun came in like a blessing every morning. There they built a solid home, full of small rituals, breakfast on Sundays on the porch, movie sessions on Friday nights and leisurely dinners on Tuesdays, where they discussed everything from politics to the flavor of dessert. They had 2 children, Lucas and Clara. A couple of brothers who grew up among books, open conversations, and constant displays of affection. Daniel was always a present father, the kind who took and picked up children from school, who knew the teachers' names and attended all the meetings. Helena, in turn, was the type of mother who encouraged creativity, who knelt on the floor to paint with her children, but also knew how to be firm when necessary. Their education was always treated as a joint project. No decision was made without dialogue, without listening to the other person. It was common for friends to comment that the couple looked like they were taken from an inspiring film. The neighbors admired them. Co-workers respected them. To outsiders, Helena and Daniel's life was the picture of a successful union. Over the years, Helena has become a reference in her field. She grew professionally, began to be invited to participate in international conferences and was recognized as one of the most influential female voices in the sector in which she worked. His schedule began to become increasingly tight, requiring frequent travel, long hours in meetings, and an increasing number of social engagements. Daniel, although he also had a solid career, chose to maintain his current position to ensure more time with his children and domestic routine. He was the one who took care of dinner during the week, who followed up on schoolwork, who decorated the house at Christmas while Helena was still disembarking from some international flight. This was never a problem between them. Daniel admired his wife's strength and ambition. He was proud to see her growing, taking on new roles, breaking down barriers. He never felt diminished or threatened. On the contrary, he saw himself as part of that achievement. But little by little, the routine began to change. Dinners became rarer, Friday nights were replaced by corporate events, and Sundays became silent, with her resting from exhausting trips or finishing presentations in the makeshift office they had set up at home. There were no fights, no accusations. Just a subtle, almost imperceptible distancing. The kind of distancing that is not noticed all at once, but rather in bits and pieces, an absence in the eyes, a touch that takes a while to happen, a conversation that ends before it begins. Daniel missed her. The version of her he knew. But he didn't say it. He kept the nostalgia of the early years to himself, trying to believe that it was part of the natural maturation of a marriage. He was a patient man, with a deep faith in building things together, and so he believed that this turbulent time was just another challenge to be overcome. Helena, in turn, was starting to show signs of fatigue. The emotional burden of her professional activities was becoming increasingly intense. She began to sleep less, to get irritated by details and to isolate herself in small moments of silence that had never existed between them before. She said she was overwhelmed, but she also resisted the idea of slowing down. Professional success lulled her in an addictive way, as if, by stopping, she would lose part of what she had achieved. The children, increasingly perceptive, began to notice the difference in the home environment. Clara asked why her mother took so long to arrive, and Lucas avoided inviting friends home on Sundays, claiming that the atmosphere was strange. Daniel, sensitive to his children's behavior, began to pay extra attention so that they would not feel their mother's absence so painfully. But I knew I couldn't fill all the spaces. Helena was irreplaceable. And even when she was physically present, there was something about her that felt distant, as if part of her was somewhere else, or with other people. Still, there was love. Daniel clung to the idea that all of this was temporary, that all it took was some time together, a trip together, a good conversation without interruptions. He planned a romantic getaway, a week out of town, just the two of us. But she politely declined, saying that she had a series of unpostponable commitments and that it would be best to schedule something for the following month. The month passed. Then one more. And the trip never happened. The routine, on the other hand, continued unabated, marked by hurried messages, postponed dinners and distracted kisses. Close friends began to notice Helena's absence at social gatherings. When asked about her, Daniel responded with a smile that hid more than it revealed. He said she was busy, that the projects were taking a lot out of her. And it was true. But it was also the simplest way of not facing what he was beginning to feel deep in his chest, a type of loneliness that cannot be explained, because it arises precisely next to the person you love. It's the kind of emptiness that has no shape, but weighs heavily. And when it is not spoken, it becomes routine. Still, Daniel kept the faith. He continued to take care of the house, the children, and the details of everyday life. He filled the fridge with her favorite fruits, left her loving notes, and bought her books that she mentioned in passing. He truly believed that daily gestures sustained love in difficult times. He didn't demand from her what he knew he couldn't give at the moment. He just waited. And silently, he hoped that she would notice. The distance between them grew so discreetly that it almost seemed natural. But Daniel refused to accept that their love could be defeated by a tight schedule. He had seen couples lose each other for much less. And he always thought that with them it would be different. Because, deep down, he believed that what they had built was too strong to crumble like that. Maybe, he thought, all they needed was time. And he was willing to wait. What he didn't know, what he could never have imagined, was that time was running in another direction. That while he struggled to keep what had been built standing, something completely different was being prepared outside his field of vision. Something that could not be undone with a conversation, a hug or a trip. Something that had already crossed the limits of what he once swore to know. The morning began like so many others. Daniel left early, dropped the kids off at school, stopped at the market to buy Helena's favorite fruits, and headed to the office. He had in mind to organize all the quarterly reports before the presentation with the new director, and that kept him busy enough not to notice how quickly time was passing. The hours passed with the intensity of someone trying to ignore something they can't name. There had been something bothering Daniel for the last few days. It wasn't a suspicion, not yet, it was more like a silent restlessness, a muffled sound deep in his chest. Something out of place, but he still couldn't put his finger on it. Helena was more distracted, that was a fact. But that wasn't all. Her glances were shorter, her touches more spaced out, her words more practical. He tried to rationalize everything, attribute it to fatigue, the demands of her work, the demanding routines with the children. But deep down, a part of him was starting to prepare himself for something that hadn't happened yet. Or that maybe had been happening for longer than he imagined. That afternoon, when he was leaving work, Daniel received an invitation to the company dinner, an important event to sign new contracts and present changes in the operations department. It wasn't the kind of event he would normally prioritize, but that week, for some reason, he felt he needed to get out, breathe new air, see faces that weren't the same as those from his exhausting routine between home, school, and virtual meetings. He called Helena and told her he was going out for dinner, and she responded with an almost anesthetic naturalness, saying she would be at home resting, that she might take the opportunity to catch up on her reading. The way she said it sounded strange, as if she were narrating a script that had already been rehearsed. He hesitated for a second, but let it go. Helena had always been convincing, she had always known how to articulate words well. And that was exactly what was now starting to sound dangerous. The event was held in an elegant restaurant, one of those that combines modern ambience with low lighting, chosen purposefully to create comfort and exclusivity. Daniel arrived with his jacket draped over his shoulders, his face slightly tired, but with the posture of someone who just needed a quiet night to clear his head. He met up with colleagues, chatted, laughed a little, pretended to be completely present. But he wasn't. Something was bothering him. A sensation on the back of his neck, an involuntary shiver that wasn't coming from the air conditioning. He went to the bathroom to wash his face and, upon returning to the main hall, his gaze was automatically drawn to a table near the entrance. And then time stood still. His body froze, and the blood seemed to lose its way through his veins. There she was. Sitting. Beautiful. Elegant. Wearing the dark blue dress he remembered buying for their wedding anniversary. Her hair tied up delicately, her shoulders bare, her makeup light, everything perfectly composed as if that moment had been rehearsed for days. But that wasn't what made him hold his breath. It was the man in front of him. A stranger with a well-groomed appearance, a tight suit, and a posture too relaxed for someone in front of a married woman. He was holding her hand on the table. They were laughing, exchanging glances that spoke of an intimacy that Daniel didn't recognize. A simple but devastating gesture. Her hand rested on his with a naturalness that gave him goosebumps. She smiled like she hadn't smiled in weeks. Like she hadn't smiled at him. Daniel didn't move for long seconds. The sound of the surroundings was swallowed by a dull hum, as if the world were silently watching his collapse. He didn't know if he was breathing. He didn't know if he wanted to stay there. But something inside him pushed him. Not anger. Not yet. It was the impulse of someone who needs to look disaster in the eye to believe it's real. He walked to their table without thinking, each step a punch to his own chest. When he reached her, she looked up and everything on her face shattered into 1,000 fragments. The shock. The panic. The shame. They were all there. In seconds. The silence between the three of them was thick as concrete. Daniel didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice was firm, sharp, definitive. And each word he said fell like a hammer on the table. Helena tried to say something in reply, but her voice was lost along the way. The man remained still, uncomfortable, but said nothing. No justification. No attempt at explanation. Daniel looked at the two of them and felt as if he were outside his own body, observing a scene from the outside, as if he were a stranger watching the destruction of a life that had been carefully built over years. He walked away silently, without looking back, while the other guests, surreptitiously, pretended not to have seen. But everyone saw. And the silence in the hall now had another weight. He left the restaurant with firm steps, but inside he was broken. He got into his car and, for minutes, he couldn't start the engine. He just stood there, staring at the steering wheel, trying to understand how he had gotten to this point. He began to revisit the last few months. The signs he had ignored. The subtle changes. The repeated apologies. The trips. The nights when she said she was exhausted. The increasingly shorter messages. He realized that, out of love, he had tolerated more than he should have. He had accepted emotional crumbs believing it was temporary. And now, it all made too much sense. When he got home, he found the room empty, her clothes organized as if nothing had happened. The family photos were still there, the books, the smells, the memories. But something had been broken forever. The trust. The invisible foundation that supported everything. He threw himself on the bed, but did not sleep. He closed his eyes and saw the image of her holding the other man's hand. The repetition of that scene seemed tattooed in his mind. He got up, walked through the dark house, and went to his children's room. They were sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the earthquake that had just happened. He looked at them with a lump in his throat. How would he explain everything? How would he protect them both from that new future that he himself could not yet imagine? In the following days, Helena tried to maintain an appearance of normality. She arrived home on time, smiled at her children, and said she was tired. Daniel, in turn, pretended that nothing had changed. But inside, he was at war. Every word she said now seemed like a lie. Every gesture, an act. He avoided confronting her directly. It wasn't time yet. He needed to understand more. He needed to know how far this was going. And so, discreetly, he began to observe. He watched the schedules, noticed the patterns, checked statements, calls, travels. And what he found only made the hole inside his chest bigger. The betrayal wasn't recent. Nor superficial. It was something that had been cultivated for a long time. With planning. With care. With the same dedication that he once thought she had for the home they had built together. One day, when he opened his laptop at home to print a document, he found emails filed in a hidden folder. Dialogues that stretched back months. Intimate conversations. Details of meetings. Plans. There were even references to his children. Comments about how they would react, about how it would be necessary to do things the right way. Daniel felt the ground disappear from under him. It was more than betrayal. It was premeditation. And, worse, it involved the children. The woman he was sleeping with had become a stranger, capable of plotting escape routes while still claiming to love him. That night, he didn't say anything. They had dinner together. She told him about a conference, the children talked about school, and he smiled. As if everything was normal. But inside, something had changed. For the first time, he stopped waiting. He stopped believing that there was still a way back. And it was in that silence that he began to plan. Not revenge. But an answer. Something that would put everything right. Something that would bring justice not only for him, but for his children. Something that would stop her from going through with the plans he was now beginning to understand. The betrayal had been confirmed. But it was still necessary to understand why. And most importantly, how far she was willing to go. Because there was something bigger behind it all. Something Daniel didn't know yet. But that would soon come to light. And it would change everything. The silence between them lasted for days. Daniel no longer confronted her, he just observed, and Helena, in turn, seemed increasingly impatient with his coldness, with the lack of questions, as if the silence that had once been complicit had now become the cruelest of judgments. The children, intuitive, absorbed the atmosphere and walked around the walls of the house as if any noise could detonate a bomb. Daniel no longer slept. He spent the early hours of the morning going through documents, messages, bank accounts, everything in search of details. Everything that had previously been invisible now began to appear, and what he discovered increased his internal abyss. Until, on a normal Tuesday, after dropping Clara off at drama class, a notification on his cell phone caught his attention. An email, sent by mistake to his corporate address, perhaps she had oversaw the forwarding of messages. In the body of the email, a travel itinerary with names, information and an international address of residence, scheduled for less than 20 days from then. The names of his children were there. And there was no room for him. Not as a father, not as a presence, not as a memory. Just as an omitted name. It was from this point on that Daniel understood that what was at stake was not only the betrayal of a conjugal love, but the attempt to erase it from the lives of his own children. The betrayal was just the visible tip of something more cruel, more perverse. That man, the lover, was not just a passing romance. He was the future that Helena had chosen to build, with a new identity, a new city, a new surname, and, most painful of all, without him. Daniel made his decision there. And he decided to do it in the most painfully correct way possible, without scandals, without violence, without the emotional imbalance that she might have expected. That night, he confronted her with a calmness that dismantled her. He said he knew. That he had seen. That he didn't need her to explain anything. He just wanted the truth. But not the comfortable half. He wanted everything. Including what she had been trying to hide. She tried to maintain her composure, feigned surprise, tried to deny it. But he interrupted. He picked up his cell phone, opened the email with the notes, the children's information, the receipts. He showed them. Helena remained silent for several seconds, until her face began to fall. The words came out slurred, loaded with an old weight, and she finally began to speak. She said she was no longer happy, that she felt suffocated, that she needed a new life. Daniel listened without interrupting, but his eyes did not move, as if he did not want to miss a single nuance of her face as she revealed what she had been trying to hide for so long. And then, with a broken voice, she said that the plan was to start over from scratch, far from everything, far from him. That her new partner had gotten a job offer abroad and she, with his support, had decided to take the children. Without warning. Without sharing. Without asking permission. Daniel took a deep breath. He was wounded, but not destroyed. He looked at her as if he saw a stranger. And then he asked. Just one question. Who else knew? It was at that moment that Daniel's world stopped. Helena hesitated. He lowered his eyes. And he said, in a whisper, that Clara already knew. That the daughter had been involved in the plan weeks before. Who had agreed to go. And who even helped organize things behind his father's back. Daniel felt like the ground had disappeared. Clara. Your girl. The most sensitive. The one who always said she loved him before going to sleep. Who wrote him notes with colorful drawings saying he was the best father in the world. The pain was indescribable. But it didn't explode. He just got up and left the room, went to his daughter's room, found her backpack on the floor and opened it. There were the school brochures outside, the filled-out paperwork, the address of the new residence. And a letter addressed to him, undelivered. He read it. Each word pierced his chest like glass. Clara said she loved him, but that she wanted to see her mother happy. He didn't understand why he was always sad. That the mother said she needed help to get out of that unhappy life and that she, as a daughter, wanted to help. Daniel sat on the bed and cried. He didn't scream. He didn't blame the girl. He knew there was something more behind it. No one makes a decision like that alone. It was then that something in his mind began to connect loose pieces. If Clara knew, why didn't Lucas? Or did he know? He decided to investigate further. He searched through his son's tablet records and found old conversations between him and his mother. Messages in which Lucas asked about the plan to move and said he didn't want to leave his father behind. In one of the messages, she said she was afraid his father would get sick with sadness. And then Daniel saw what he didn't want. Helena had replied saying that if he told her anything, he could lose everything. That he should trust her. That it was for the good of the family. Daniel stopped there. His face wet with tears. Now everything made sense. The secret she was hiding wasn't just the physical betrayal. It was the emotional manipulation of her children. Using their feelings as a shield, as a bargaining chip to justify a selfish choice. She had wrapped the children in a web of lies, making them believe they were helping, when in fact they were being used. The next day, Daniel hired a lawyer specializing in family law. He handed over the evidence. He organized everything without fuss. And, in the meantime, at home, he acted as kindly as ever. He made coffee, took the children to school, and smiled. But inside, he was no longer the same. He knew he was facing a war. Not for revenge. But for the sanity of his children. For his own dignity. And for the right to continue being a father. There would be no more concessions. Not after what she had done. That week, he scheduled a meeting with the school and notified the principal about the attempt to elope the children to another country, which by law could be considered parental kidnapping. He started the process based on the evidence collected and, with the support of a forensic psychologist, requested therapeutic support for the children. The next night, when he got home, he found Helena sitting on the couch, holding the papers that had been handed to him by the court officials. Her face was haggard, without makeup, and her eyes were sunken as if she hadn't slept in days. Daniel came in, put the keys on the counter, and simply said that things would now be resolved in the right way. She tried to raise her voice, to accuse him of exposing the children, but he didn't respond. He picked up the papers from the table, pointed to the section where she was legally notified not to leave the country with the children, and left the room. That woman was no longer a wife, she was a threat to the children's emotional well-being. And so, he would be cold. He would be firm. He would be the rock that the children needed at that moment. Over the weekend, when he was taking Clara to a school event, his daughter asked if he was mad at her. Daniel parked the car, turned off the engine, and took a deep breath. He said he would never be mad, that she was just a child trying to protect her mother, and that he understood. But sometimes, even adults make big mistakes. And when they do, they have to face the consequences. She cried. She apologized. She said she didn't know it would hurt him so much. He hugged her. And it was in that silent, tight hug that he decided he would do everything he could to keep his children away from the mess that adults had created. And, above all, he would make sure they never felt guilty again for their parents' choices. And so, while the chaos unfolded, while lawyers exchanged notifications and the backrooms were buzzing, Daniel stood firm. He knew there was more to come. That the worst was not over yet. But now, at least, he knew who he was dealing with. And he was ready. Because there was something she didn't know, he was making plans too. Only, this time, she wouldn't be the one choosing the future. The courtroom was constantly moving. Chairs were scraping, footsteps were hurried, voices were muffled by heavy wooden doors that opened and closed frequently. Daniel was there, standing, his tie tightening around his neck, his documents organized in his black folder, and his eyes fixed on nothing. It wasn't just a hearing, it was a divider. The room was cold, but his palms were sweating. Helena arrived a few minutes later, accompanied by her lawyer. She was serious, composed, and dressed soberly. She didn't exchange glances with Daniel. She held her head high, but the tension in her jaw betrayed everything that was going on inside. They were no longer at home, between familiar walls and rooms where they had lived their memories. Now they were before the courts, where what mattered were evidence, facts, and the protection of their children. When they were called to the initial hearing, the judge, a woman with a firm voice and unshakable posture, began the session calmly, but there was no room for beating around the bush. It was a delicate case, with serious evidence of attempted international evasion without parental consent, which required immediate precautionary measures. And, given the documentation presented by Daniel, including records of purchased tickets, school communications, saved conversations and transcripts of messages with the children, the judge urgently determined that neither of them could leave the country with the children without express judicial authorization. Helena listened to the sentence in silence, but her skin turned pale. The lawyer tried to negotiate, proposed conciliation, spoke about parental dialogue, but the judge was clear, this was not a common disagreement, but rather a case involving manipulation of minors and a real risk of permanent parental removal. Daniel didn't smile, he wasn't thrilled with the decision. He just lowered his head and took a deep breath. That was not a victory, it was a necessary act of protection. As they left the room, their eyes finally met. And in that moment, what existed between the two was no longer love, hurt or desire. It was just an acknowledgement that they both knew how far they had come, and that now everything had a price. In the following days, Helena did not return home. Her presence became sporadic, restricted to scheduled visits with her children. Clara kept her distance, shaken by the consequences of what she had discovered and confused about who to trust. Lucas, more sensitive, clung to his father with an intensity that revealed his fear of being left behind. Daniel tried to carry on with the routine as naturally as possible, but it wasn't easy to explain to the children why their mother now slept somewhere else, why meetings with psychologists had become weekly, why the two adults they loved the most could no longer share the same room for more than 10 minutes. He knew it would leave scars, but he would much rather deal with the pain of the truth than perpetuate the peace built on a lie. One Saturday morning, Helena called asking to speak to Daniel. She said she wanted to speak in person, without lawyers. He hesitated, but accepted. They met at a discreet cafe, far from the city center. She arrived with a tired face, her eyes marked by sleepless nights. She ordered a tea, folded her hands on the table and began to talk. She said she had not expected things to get this bad, that at no point did she think he would have the courage to expose everything like that. That she just wanted to start over, that she thought she was doing the best she could. Daniel listened to her, but did not respond. He just watched. And then she said something that changed the tone of the conversation. She said that her lover had left. That, after the legal exposure, he had lost his job, cut off contact and disappeared. She said she felt betrayed by someone who promised a new beginning and who, when faced with the first difficulty, backed down. She did not cry, but there was a weight in her speech that showed her collapse. For the first time, Helena's unshakable self-confidence was in ruins. And it was in this rubble that she now tried to find some kind of salvation. Daniel took a breath, remained calm, but offered no compassion. There was no room for that. Not anymore. He said he was sorry for her, but that her choices had consequences. That her children needed stability, and that he would not allow them to be dragged into the wreckage of that story. She asked to see the children more often. She said she was willing to do family therapy, that she wanted to restore the bond. Daniel looked at her sincerely. He said he would support any genuine effort in that direction, but that the children would no longer be part of emotional toys. That now, everything would have to be built on actions, not speeches. And then he got up, paid the bill and left, leaving Helena alone, in front of the now cold cup of tea, staring at her reflection in the glass of the display case, a woman who believed she could rewrite her own destiny, without considering the impact of other people's scribbles. In the following weeks, the processes continued. Daniel obtained shared custody with fixed residence of the children with him, while Helena maintained scheduled visits. The therapy sessions progressed slowly, but it was noticeable that Clara and Lucas were beginning to regain some stability. Daniel, for his part, was rebuilding himself. Not as a wounded man, but as a father reborn from the fall. And it was during this period of reconstruction that something unexpected happened. At a talk on post-divorce parenting, which he attended at the invitation of his children's therapist, Daniel met Anna. She was a divorced educational psychologist and mother of a boy the same age as Lucas, and her presence was like a breeze after a long storm. They talked after the lecture, exchanged ideas, experiences, and, over time, messages. The connection was natural, unhurried. Nothing about Anna reminded him of Helena, and perhaps that was why Daniel felt so comfortable. She was a light, direct, transparent woman. Someone who didn't need to pretend anything to be whole. The meetings became frequent. First as friends, then as something more. The children got to know each other and got along well. And Daniel, as the months went by, felt like he was relearning how to love in a new way. There was no rush, no demands, just presence. And that was enough. Helena, upon learning of the new relationship, oscillated between discomfort and resignation. But she no longer had control over anything. She had lost the right to choose the next chapters of that story. One day, when she dropped the children off at Daniel's house, she watched Anna from afar, helping Clara with her backpack and laughing with Lucas. For the first time, Helena saw someone occupy the space that had once been hers. Not with invasion, but with affection. And that, perhaps, hurt more than any sentence. Daniel did not celebrate. He did not feel pleasure in seeing her suffer. But there was a silent justice in all of this. Life went on. And he now understood that true love is not measured by the intensity of the moments, but by the persistence in the difficult days. And that, as much as betrayal can destroy, it can also free. There was no more resentment. Only learning. And the certainty that, despite everything, he was still capable of starting over. Because, in the end, when everything seemed lost, it was the love for his children that kept him together. And it was this same love that, through tortuous paths, led him back to himself. The mornings were softer after the storm, but there was still an echo of what had been devastated lingering in every corner. Routines took shape again, but now shaped by a new, more mature, more selective consciousness. The days passed with a care that had previously seemed automatic, but was now fully intentional. Clara and Lucas no longer asked why everything had changed, but rather how to continue with what was still standing. Daniel saw in them a precocious maturity, a more attentive look at silences, a wisdom acquired through trauma, but still with the tenderness that only children can maintain even when the world falls apart. He watched them as if overseeing the reconstruction of something sacred, taking care that no new cracks appeared, that none of the old ones hurt again. There was no longer room for guilt, but rather for conscious decisions. Everything that was done now was for them, for the souls that had once been thrust into the center of an invisible war between two adults who were supposed to protect them above any personal frustration. The relationship with Anna unfolded discreetly and deeply. It wasn't an overwhelming passion, it was a careful surrender. Daniel had understood that true love isn't about urgency, it's about permanence, and he saw this in her small gestures, in the way she respected his children's time, how she didn't force intimacy, but also didn't cancel herself out. She was adding to it, not replacing it, and that was exactly what made him trust her. By her side, Daniel didn't need to pretend he was whole all the time, he didn't need to explain himself, he didn't need to have all the answers. For the first time, he felt he could be vulnerable without fear of being taken advantage of. The new that was emerging was so genuine that he avoided comparing himself to the past, like someone who knows that doing justice to what he's experiencing now means not letting old wounds contaminate the chance of a clean future. Helena, on the other hand, was trying to relearn how to exist away from the identity she had built for years. Her career had suffered a visible setback after the legal exposure, invitations to conferences had ceased for an indefinite period of time, and even within the company, her image as an ethical and inspiring professional was tarnished by whispers in the hallways and sideways glances. People didn't say anything, but the way they looked away was enough. She felt the fall like someone feeling their skin tear in slow motion. The man who had promised a new beginning was gone, the escape plans were gone, and she no longer had control over the narrative. All she could do was stare into the mirrors. And in them, each reflection showed a version of herself that she barely recognized. She tried to rebuild bridges with her children, and although Lucas seemed to be getting closer, Clara still maintained a silent resistance, as if she were waiting for her mother to prove something. The bond between mother and daughter had not been broken, but it was suspended, demanding from Helena a type of surrender that she was still learning to cultivate. Promises were no longer enough, it was necessary to rebuild presence, brick by brick, without haste, without manipulation, only with truth. It was on one of those afternoons when Helena and her children were reunited that Daniel asked if the three of them could spend a day together at the park. She wanted to create a good memory, even if it was short, away from the tension that had been marking formal meetings. Daniel thought for a few seconds before answering. He agreed. He knew that this was not just her wish, but a need for the children as well. And perhaps it was, for him, a way of facing what was left of the past, with dignity. They went. They brought snacks, games, balls, and for a few hours, there were just 4 people trying to breathe amidst the wreckage. Clara kept a certain emotional distance, but she didn't shy away. Lucas ran, laughed, asked to be held. Daniel watched everything as if watching the last scene of a difficult chapter. When Helena approached to talk, the children were distracted by kites in the distance. She apologized again, but this time there was no attempt to justify herself. She said she had lost her way, that it wasn't the man who had deceived her that had destroyed her, but the idea that she deserved something more, even if it cost her the integrity of everything she had built. She said that only now did she understand that there are voids that cannot be filled by running away, but by confronting them. And that her mistake was not wanting to be happy, but wanting it without responsibility, without looking to the side, without caring about the lives that depended on her choices. Daniel listened to everything calmly. Not out of coldness, but out of maturity. He said he didn't hate her. And that, as unbelievable as it seemed, he was grateful for having been betrayed. Because only there, in that moment, after everything, had he discovered who he really was. And that maybe, one day, she would have that chance too. She cried, but didn't ask for anything else. She just thanked him for listening. The following months brought new challenges. Family therapy continued, with slow but significant progress. Clara began to open up more, Lucas regained his confidence and the sparkle in his eyes. Anna followed Daniel's side with the same care, without rushing, without demanding space. Just being there. Life was now written at a different pace. There were marks, yes, but there was also a clarity. Every decision was measured, every movement was thought out not only with the heart, but with conscience. Time, that old sculptor of wounds, was beginning to soften the edges of the days. Then came some unexpected news. Helena had received a job offer in another city, something modest but dignified. It would be a real chance to rebuild her own path, far from the eyes that judged her at every turn. She asked Daniel to talk to her. She said she didn't want to go without his consent. She wasn't considering taking the children, but she wanted them to visit her from time to time, if they felt like it. She said she needed to start over, and that now she wanted to do it the right way. Daniel listened, considered, and although he felt apprehensive, he understood that her starting over, done responsibly, was also part of everyone's healing process. He agreed to the change, as long as it was legally structured and with guarantees for the children's emotional well-being. They went to the registry office together. They signed the adjustments. For the first time in a long time, they acted as partners in something. Not as a couple, but as two adults aware of what they needed to preserve. Shortly before the move, Helena called Clara for a private conversation. The two sat in the girl's room, and the mother said she was sorry for everything. That he didn't expect immediate forgiveness, but that he would always be there whenever his daughter wanted. Clara, with tears held back, simply said that she needed some time. And that, if one day he forgave, it would be because he felt it, not because he was asked to. Helen hugged her. For the first time in months, Clara didn't refuse the hug, but she didn't return it either. A hug in suspension. A gesture that said it all: there is still a bond, but it needs to breathe so as not to suffocate. Daniel, in turn, began to consider moving as well. Not far away, but to a new home. The house where they had lived before was full of memories that the children were beginning to associate with pain. Anna suggested that they look for a new place, where everything could start over with different eyes, different walls, different possibilities. They found a simple house, with a garden in front and a small porch. The children helped choose the rooms. They painted the walls together. They made that process something light, almost like a rite of passage. The change of address, at that moment, was more than just logistics. It was symbolic. It was about leaving behind what no longer fit and making room for the new. The cycle seemed to find a rhythm. But life, that unpredictable writer, still had something in store. Daniel received an invitation to participate in a conference on active parenting and emotional reconstruction after divorce. He was reluctant. He didn't see himself as a speaker. But the children's therapist insisted. He said he had something valuable to share. Something that could help other families. He accepted. He went up on stage with trembling hands, but with a firm soul. He spoke not as a hero, but as a human being. He shared mistakes, pain, falls, reconstructions. The audience fell silent. At the end, he received a standing ovation. And it was in that applause that he understood: sometimes, life destroys you so that you learn to rise up with more truth. And that, even among the rubble, there is always a way back home, as long as you have the courage to walk. The days took on a softer tone, but not a simpler one. Each morning was built with the weight of choice, care, and the awareness that emotional stability was something to be maintained with effort, like a thread stretched over the abyss. The new house was brighter, quieter, more alive. Clara had pasted her paintings on the bedroom walls, Lucas kept his telescope pointed at the night sky every night, and Daniel now had his own table in the corner of the room, where he organized documents, readings, and notes for the new social project he was developing. Anna was present without taking up all the space, and her sensitivity helped to build, in an almost imperceptible way, a family structure that was not born from the draft of something old, but from the seed of something genuine and possible. One night when Clara couldn't sleep, Daniel entered her room and found her sitting on the bed, hugging the pillow. The girl looked at him with teary eyes, but said nothing. Daniel sat down beside her and waited. She then whispered that she sometimes missed her mother, even with everything that had happened, and it made her feel guilty. Daniel held her hand and said that missing her wasn't the same as forgetting what happened. That love and disappointment could live in the same heart, and that courage lay in understanding this without letting one feeling override the other. Clara threw herself into her father's lap and cried silently. He wrapped his arms around her, certain that this was the kind of pain that wasn't cured with advice, but with presence. Lucas, on the other hand, was calmer, but began to ask questions about the past. I wanted to understand why my mother had done what she did, why the other man had disappeared, why adults sometimes got lost in a way that was so hard to explain. Daniel always tried to answer as truthfully as possible for his age. He said that adults make mistakes, that they make bad choices, but that the most important thing was what they did after their mistakes. That acknowledging the pain caused was also a form of love. While the children went through their own process of understanding, Daniel was sought out by other families in similar situations. The video of his lecture was shared by an NGO supporting divorced parents and went viral on social media. He began to receive messages, invitations, and testimonials from people who saw themselves in his story. At first, he was hesitant to expose himself more, but he soon realized that this new role was not vanity, but a mission. He began organizing monthly meetings to share experiences, exchange ideas, and create support networks. He felt that his pain was serving as a bridge to the healing of others. That made sense. It kept him going on the hardest days, the ones when the ghosts of the past still dared to whisper. Anna accompanied him discreetly, participated in some events, but never tried to be the protagonist of his narrative. She respected the history that came before her, and that made her even more present. They spoke about the future cautiously, but they did speak. Anna suggested, in a spontaneous conversation, the possibility of a family trip, something small, a weekend away, to mark a new cycle, without the presence of old memories. Daniel hesitated, but accepted. He felt it was time. They chose a nearby town with nature, easy trails, and simple cabins. When they told their children, their reaction was mixed. Lucas was thrilled and wanted to pack everything up that same day. Clara just nodded, but Daniel noticed a mix of curiosity and resistance in her eyes. During the trip, there were moments of discomfort, long silences, and reflections. But there was also laughter, games, surprise dives, and stories told by the campfire. And at one point, Clara asked Anna to go for a walk on a trail alone. They were gone for more than half an hour. When they returned, there was a different sparkle in the girl's eyes. A beginning of trust, of openness. Anna didn't say anything to Daniel that night, but he knew, without needing to ask, that something precious had begun between them. When they returned from their trip, Daniel received a registered letter in his name. It was Helena's. The carefully drawn calligraphy filled pages with disarming sincerity. She didn't ask for forgiveness, she didn't try to justify herself. I was just telling it like it was. He spoke of lonely nights, of the small school where he now taught, of the mistakes he recognized and of the efforts to change. He said he was in therapy, that he was trying to understand his own emptiness, that he read the texts that Daniel published and was moved. She said she understood if he didn't want to know about her anymore, but that she still had hope that, one day, they could talk like two human beings who had been through everything and still hadn't completely lost each other. Daniel read the letter in silence, then put it away in a box where other important memories were, not because he wanted to revisit that past, but because he now knew that even pain deserved a place, as long as it no longer occupied the center of the house. At school, Clara wrote an essay that was praised by her teacher. The topic was, "My Biggest Change." She described, in delicate and impactful words, the process of relearning to trust adults. She spoke about the pain she kept in her heart, but also about what she had found in new ways of loving. The teacher called Daniel and read the text with tears in her eyes. She said that she rarely saw such maturity in a teenager. He didn't cry there, but when he got home, he went into Clara's room and hugged her without saying anything. She understood. Lucas, at the same time, had developed the habit of writing little notes and leaving them hidden around the house. Messages that he said were, things that the heart thinks when the mouth is sleeping. Daniel collected each one. One day he found a note that said, "Thank you for not leaving when things got hard." He kept that piece of paper in his wallet pocket, next to the first photo of the two children together. Life, finally, began to breathe again with a different rhythm. The court hearings had ceased, the agreements were in place, and Helena's visits had become more natural, less tense. On one of these visits, Clara suggested that her mother come and see her performance at school, a small dance show. Daniel watched from afar, saw the two exchanging shy but genuine glances. After the presentation, Helena thanked Daniel for the opportunity to be present. He just nodded, not out of indifference, but out of understanding. He knew that every gesture was part of a process. And that forgiveness was not about erasing, but about recognizing without allowing it to repeat itself. In a conversation with Anna, days later, he confessed that he never imagined he could be where he was now. He said that despite everything, there was a sense of peace in his chest. Not because things were good again, but because they were real now. The following spring, Daniel organized a small event to end the cycle with the groups he was working with. He invited parents, psychologists, friends, and partners who had walked with him. At the end of the meeting, a young father approached him and said that he only didn't give up on his marriage after discovering that he had been cheating because he had seen how Daniel had dealt with everything. He said that he understood that loving your children was stronger than hating those who hurt you. Daniel hugged him, moved. And, for the first time, he realized that his story had left its mark on his circle. When he got home that night, he walked slowly in, went upstairs, and found Anna in her room, reading. He sat on the edge of the bed and remained silent. She looked up and smiled. Daniel then said that, despite everything, that was where he wanted to be. That it was in that shared silence, in that absence of masks, in that light complicity, that he finally felt whole. Anna held his hand, and in that touch, without promises, without haste, there was more certainty than any vow made out loud. The story was not yet over. But for the first time, the ending did not seem an urgent necessity. Just a natural consequence of the path that was now being truly walked. Time, with its silent and relentless way of adjusting everything to its rightful place, continued to shape the paths that each one had chosen, even if they didn't always know they were choosing. The story that had begun as a simple corporate dinner now ended in a simpler but more meaningful house, on a late autumn afternoon where the leaves danced in the wind and life, for the first time in a long time, seemed at peace. Daniel watched Clara practice her dance steps in the backyard, while Lucas tried to make a paper comet fly, and Anna, sitting on the porch, wrote in a notebook. He approached her, lightly touched her shoulder and said, in the calm voice of someone who no longer needed to prove anything, "We did it." But the end, as every good story knows, is not just about who wins, but about how each person deals with what they have become. Helena, after the definitive move, maintained contact with her children with surprising consistency. He didn't miss important dates, he sent handwritten letters, he participated in school meetings via video calls, he tried, in his own way, to be present even if his presence no longer carried the same weight as before. A year after moving, he traveled to the city to watch Clara's dance show, sat in the audience without fuss, applauded with wet eyes, and left without asking to talk, without invading, just respecting the space that was given to him. The Helena who returned now was no longer the woman who believed she had control over everything. She was someone who had been deconstructed, brick by brick, and who now walked slowly over ruins that, little by little, were beginning to give way to a real reconstruction, not based on illusions or manipulations, but on presence and silence when necessary. The former lover, who had been the trigger for the ruin, disappeared from everyone's radar. It was discovered, some time later, that he had left the country after being accused of having an affair with another married woman, this time in his professional environment, which resulted in his dismissal and ethical proceedings. His life was lost in rumors, but it no longer mattered. His presence, once central to the collapse of a family, was now nothing more than a distant point in the timeline of someone who chose another path. Daniel, after so much time on alert, began to relax his shoulders. The love he had built with Anna took definitive shape when, without fanfare or cinematic declarations, she moved into the same house. The decision was made over coffee and an honest conversation, without rushing, without anxiety. It was just the right moment. The children accepted it naturally. It was no longer about replacement, it was about continuity. Clara began to help Anna with projects at the school where she worked, and Lucas would call Anna's son to sleep over on the weekends. The new family configuration, imperfect and beautiful, was sustained not by illusions, but by conscious choices, made with each new dawn. One night, after putting the children to bed, Daniel found a wedding photo of himself and Helena tucked away among old books. He looked at the smiling faces, the sparkle in the eyes of those who believed they had their whole future ahead of them, and for the first time, he didn't feel angry. Just acceptance. Life had been hard, yes, but fair. Everyone was now where they needed to be. He tore the photo in half, not out of revenge, but as a symbol that the cycle had indeed ended. He kept the half where the young children appeared in the corner of the image. The rest went in the trash. The greatest lesson, however, was not in overcoming or in the new chance to love, but in what he passed on to his children. Clara, when writing her first text for the school magazine, chose the theme, "The Day I Understood What Truth Is." In the text, she spoke about seeing her father cry in silence, about her mother admitting her own mistakes, about growing up in a home where the truth hurt, but set you free. Lucas, in a drawing assignment, drew a house with a huge heart inside and wrote, "My house has fewer people than before, but it has more love." Daniel, upon reading these expressions, understood that winning was not about keeping the structure intact, but ensuring that the rubble did not bury what was most valuable, the hearts of the children. Years later, during a conversation with a group of parents at a national event on family rebuilding, Daniel received a standing ovation after his speech. "Not because I won a legal battle, but because I chose not to turn pain into life imprisonment." He said, in front of hundreds of people, that betrayal does not end when the other person leaves, but when we decide not to live with the ruins of it in our days. That it is possible to start over, not on top of others, but alongside yourself, accepting that stories change, that scripts are rewritten, and that the happy ending is not a return to what was, but the courage to create something new from what is left. And it was with this courage that he moved on, without denying the past, but without being held hostage by it. He continued with his children growing up, with Anna by his side, with a light soul. He continued knowing that he had lost what he once believed would be forever, but finding something even stronger, himself. The end of that story, marked by pain and new beginnings, was not written in words, but in daily choices. And this kind of ending, that of dignity, is always the hardest to achieve. But also the most transformative. If you've made it this far, comment now, what did you think of this story? Would you have done things differently if you were Daniel? Do you think Helena deserved the fate she had? And more, what did you learn from all of this? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the upcoming stories. Here, you will hear real and fictional narratives that show how life can surprise, and hurt, but also teach and transform. And before I finish, let me reflect on this: betrayal doesn't just destroy love. It erodes trust, breaks bonds, and breaks what only time and truth can rebuild. Families are like crystals, when they fall, they can be glued back together, but they will never be the same. Let this story serve as a warning, to remind you that betrayal is always a choice, and choices have a price. This channel does not support any type of cheating. Here, we tell stories to reflect on, not to romanticize. Until the next story.